rain hammered relentlessly against the roof of Michael Harper's truck, a constant drumbeat of chaos that made every mile feel heavier. The dark clouds over Crestwood County were thick and brooding, turning what should have been a routine drive home into something more like a battle. Michael's hands gripped the wheel tightly, knuckles white beneath the leather, as windshield wipers fought valiantly against sheets of water. Lightning split the sky, illuminating stretches of the rural highway in stark, ghostly flashes. The road ahead seemed endless, a wet ribbon vanishing into shadows, with only the occasional glimmer of a distant roadside reflector for guidance. Before diving in, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest cold case stories. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from right now. Michael tried again to call Rachel, his wife. His thumb hovered over the screen as he dialed, but the weak signal flickered like a candle struggling against the wind. No answer, no chance to explain the day's events. The thought weighed on him, a sense of helplessness that the storm seemed to magnify. Earlier that day, Michael had spent hours helping neighbors with minor emergencies. The old Ford pickup that wouldn't start for Mr. Benton on the edge of town. The young couple whose trailer had slid off a muddy driveway. Even the Johnsons, whose fence had partially collapsed in the pre-storm winds, had gotten a hand from Michael. He never sought thanks. His reward was knowing someone had help to rely on when the world seemed determined to make things difficult. It was a moral code he lived by, a simple principle. Don't leave people stranded if you can make a difference. Little did he know that principle would guide him into the eye of danger that night. The storm intensified as he drove. Rain blurred the lines on the asphalt into a slick gray smear. Every crack, every pothole, threatened to pull the truck off balance. Michael adjusted his mirrors, squinting into the sheets of rain that fell horizontally as gusts of wind threw the vehicle slightly off course. The smell of wet earth mingled with the tang of ozone after each flash of lightning, and every sound, the roar of the storm, the slap of tires against water, the hollow whistle of wind through the trees, added to the tension. He tapped the brakes lightly when a branch tumbled across the road, his instincts honed from years behind engines and steering wheels kicking in. And then he saw it. Headlights flickering in the distance, partially obscured by a veil of rain. A vehicle stopped unnaturally in the middle of the highway. Michael's heart sank slightly, recognizing the telltale signs of a stranded motorist. Without hesitation, he pulled over, his tires crunching on the wet gravel shoulder. There was no time for deliberation. He had seen enough accidents, enough people stranded, to know hesitation could cost lives. The truck's engine continued to hum steadily. In a storm this violent, the last thing anyone would want is for a vehicle to go completely silent. Headlights were essential, warnings to any oncoming cars. Michael grabbed his flashlight from the center console, its beam cutting through the sheets of rain, and stepped out. The wind ripped at his jacket, and the rain soaked him instantly, cold water seeping through layers, but he ignored it. This wasn't about him, it was about the person stranded ahead. As he approached, he saw movement inside the vehicle. The driver appeared agitated, jerking the wheel as though panicking. Words were exchanged, but the storm swallowed most of them. Michael's voice remained calm and steady, the reassurance of a man accustomed to crises. He raised his hand slightly, signaling his intentions were peaceful. The figure in the truck, shadowed and desperate, shifted uncomfortably in the seat. There was a tension in the air, a sense that the person before him was not simply stranded, but teetering on the edge of irrationality. Suddenly, the calm shattered. The figure reacted violently. Michael barely had time to defend himself, instinct guiding every motion honed from years of handling heavy machinery, lifting engines, and navigating tight spots under vehicles. He grappled with the stranger, the rain pelting them both, blurring vision and making every move treacherous. There was a sudden force, a shove, and Michael felt himself dragged off the shoulder, slipping over mud, his hands scraped raw, the flashlight skittering across wet rocks and branches. The storm seemed to conspire against him. Each flash of lightning revealed only fragments, a flailing arm, a glint of rain on metal, the terrified eyes of a man pushed to extremes. The roar of thunder drowned the shouts. the sounds of the struggle blending into the chaos of the night. Michael tried to call out, but his words were lost, as though swallowed by the storm itself. And then, just as abruptly as it began, the figure disappeared into the blackness of the tree line. Michael's truck remained idling, headlights still piercing through sheets of rain. The road, muddied and obscured, held no clues for a passerby. When the next car came along, the driver slowed, alarmed by the stationary truck, its door slightly ajar, the engine's hum incongruous with the silence around it. They called the authorities immediately. By the time Detective Marcus Boyd arrived, with a small squad and flashlights cutting through the storm, the scene was already disorienting. Water pooled in the ruts of the gravel road, tire marks were obliterated, footprints erased, and the wind-driven rain had washed away even the smallest signs of struggle. Detective Boyd, methodical and experienced, scanned the area, trying to piece together what little he could see. The storm had done what storms often do. It erased the breadcrumbs humans leave behind. Any trace that might have led them to Michael's whereabouts was gone. Boyd took notes, photographed the truck, and coordinated a search party, but the elements had conspired against them. Trees had fallen across side roads. Streams that weren't normally dangerous had surged with muddy water. Every attempt to trace Michael's path back was thwarted by nature. Meanwhile, back at the Harper household, Rachel Harper's worry was mounting. Her calls to Michael went unanswered. Lucas, young and confused, asked why his daddy hadn't come home yet. Rachel's heart tightened with every passing minute. She called neighbors, checked local stores, and even considered driving out herself. But the storm made every mile treacherous, every driveway a potential trap. The community, normally a strong network of support, was fragmented by the weather. By the early hours of the morning, search teams had combed what they could, but it was like chasing ghosts. Nothing remained. The storm had erased everything. Tire tracks, footprints, evidence of any interaction. Michael Harper had vanished not only from sight, but from memory. The entire town seemed to hold its breath, caught between hope and despair. Hours stretched into days. Rachel refused to sleep, sitting by the phone, hoping for a miracle. The townspeople, once concerned and vigilant, began to drift back to their routines, leaving the Harper family suspended in a cruel limbo. Lucas asked occasionally about his father, his small voice piercing through the grief. Rachel could only respond with reassurances, half-truths that masked the fear gnawing at her. The nights were the hardest. Every creak, every gust of wind reminded her that Michael was out there somewhere, unreachable, perhaps lost forever. Detective Boyd remained steadfast but frustrated. The resources of 2003 were limited. No widespread surveillance, no tracking of cell pings, just the remnants of a storm-washed road and a single abandoned vehicle. Weeks passed. Tips trickled in, none leading anywhere. Each time, Rachel's hope surged and then crashed against the immovable wall of uncertainty. Even now, decades later, the memory of that night remained vivid. The storm, the relentless rain, the thunder that drowned out cries, all these elements had created the perfect cover. Michael Harper was not just gone, he was erased from the landscape. And here lies the question for you. Have you ever faced a situation where the elements hid the truth? Where no matter how hard you tried, nature seemed determined to erase your path? What would you do if a loved one disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only a silent vehicle and unanswered questions? Comment below and share your thoughts. It's a situation no one should have to face alone. This case remained unresolved for decades, leaving a family in limbo and a community searching for answers that never came. But if you believe that determination, persistence, and science can uncover the truth when all else seems lost, if you're drawn to stories where relentless pursuit finally shines a light on the unsolvable, you'll want to subscribe because this channel is dedicated to cases just like Michael Harper's. Stories of hope, resilience, and justice that waits for no clock. For now, the storm had won. It had hidden the evidence, erased the trail, and suspended a family in unimaginable grief. Michael Harper's life had been paused in that moment of lightning and rain, leaving Rachel, Lucas, and Emily to carry a weight no one should bear. Yet, in the silence of the aftermath, a seed of determination was planted, one that would not remain dormant forever. The storm had passed, but its impact lingered far beyond the puddles and mud that clogged rural Highway 58. For Rachel Harper, the days following Michael's disappearance were a blur of unanswered phone calls, frantic drives along roads that led nowhere, and nights spent rocking Lucas in her arms while trying to hold back tears. The house, once a lively home filled with the sounds of family and laughter, now felt hollow. Every corner, every room seemed to echo with Michael's absence. Plates sat untouched on the kitchen counter. The garage tools he had polished and arranged stood idle, and the clock ticked with cruel precision, marking time that Michael would never return to fill. Weeks turned to months, and months slowly bled into years. The business Michael had built, Harper Auto Garage, once a thriving hub of Crestwood County, gradually dwindled. Customers who had relied on Michael's expertise began to drift elsewhere. The hum of engines, the smell of motor oil, and the chatter of local drivers faded into silence. Rachel tried to keep the doors open, but without Michael managing the hands-on repairs and maintaining community trust, the garage suffered. Eventually, she had no choice but to close it. Each lock of the door felt like a symbolic seal on the life they once had, a final acknowledgement that Michael was gone, perhaps forever. Financial strain compounded the emotional devastation. Rachel juggled odd jobs, trying to stretch the family's savings to cover basic needs, utilities, and Lucas's growing expenses. Every dollar spent reminded her of the absence that created it. Nights were long and lonely. She would lie awake, listening to the wind, half expecting Michael to walk through the door as if nothing had happened, to laugh off the storm as just another day he had faced and survived. Lucas, still only 3 years old at the time of the disappearance, could not understand the magnitude of what had occurred. He asked about his father with innocent curiosity, sometimes quietly, sometimes in moments of childlike frustration. "Where's Daddy?" he would ask, his small face pressed against the window as he looked for a figure that never appeared. Rachel's heart would twist at these moments. She wanted to answer him honestly, but feared the weight of truth would shatter his small world. Emily Harper, Michael's younger sister, was 24 when the storm changed everything. The news of Michael's disappearance hit her like a physical blow. She had always admired her brother, the way he could fix anything, the way he helped everyone in the neighborhood, the way he carried a sense of morality as naturally as breathing. But that admiration quickly transformed into a gnawing obsession. Emily couldn't understand how a man so capable could simply vanish. It was unacceptable to her sense of order, to the idea that justice and logic should always prevail. In the months that followed, Emily immersed herself in the study of forensic science. She scoured newspapers, archival reports, and missing persons databases. Each article about a cold case, each story of a family left in limbo, only fueled her determination. Michael's disappearance became the lens through which she viewed the world. She highlighted reports, took copious notes, and filled journals with observations. Articles about new forensic technologies, case studies where overlooked evidence led to breakthroughs. Emily consumed them all. This obsession was more than curiosity. It was a survival mechanism. By focusing on finding answers, she shielded herself from the unbearable helplessness of losing her brother. The local community's memory, however, faded more quickly than Emily's resolve. After the first year, news coverage dwindled. The small Crestwood County newspaper mentioned the Harper case briefly during anniversaries. A few sympathetic neighbors offered small gestures of support, but life in the town returned to its routines. Rachel and Emily attended the same grocery stores, parks, and schools, but the vibrant concern of the early days was gone. Where once friends would call or check in regularly, now there was polite distance. People assumed the storm had hidden Michael, and time had made the event a tragic story from the past. The Harper family's grief, however, was unrelenting. Time had done nothing to close the gaping absence left in their lives. During this period, Emily's character evolved in ways even she didn't fully realize at the time. She had been a student, focused on her studies and personal goals, but with Michael gone, her drive shifted. She became analytical, methodical, and fiercely protective of the truth. She often stayed awake into the early hours, studying forensic texts or reviewing archival news footage. Patterns began to emerge for her. Patterns of overlooked evidence, misinterpreted witness accounts, and outdated investigative methods. She noted the limitations of early 2000s technology, the inadequacies of local resources, and the importance of proper evidence preservation. Every observation added to a mental map she built of not only Michael's case, but of the wider world of unsolved disappearances. Emily's transformation did not occur in isolation. Samuel Harper, her father, grieved quietly, supporting Rachel and the children while masking his own despair. He would sit in the garage, now empty and locked, reminiscing about the days when Michael would tinker with engines or fix the smallest mechanical issues for neighbors. The silence was oppressive. Samuel's steady presence offered emotional stability for Emily, a reminder that grief, while personal, could be shared without diminishing its intensity. Together, the family navigated the complexity of living without Michael, balancing their need for normalcy with the constant ache of absence. Rachel, though devastated, exhibited her own brand of resilience. She maintained household routines, ensured Lucas continued to attend school, and managed day-to-day necessities. Yet, emotionally, the house remained haunted. Every creak in the floorboards, every shadow cast by flickering lights, reminded her of what was missing. She would often walk the empty hallways at night, listening to the storm outside or the gentle rustle of the trees, wondering if Michael had survived, if he was alone somewhere, waiting for someone to find him. These thoughts gnawed at her sanity, sometimes giving way to tears that would flood the bedroom floor long after Lucas had drifted to sleep. Despite these challenges, Emily's focus never wavered. While Rachel managed the home, Emily managed the story, in her mind and through records. She clipped articles, kept notebooks of sightings and rumors, and even wrote letters to local authorities requesting updates. These were often met with polite but dismissive responses. "The case is under review," or "we'll let you know if there's any new information," became common refrains. The bureaucracy, coupled with outdated investigative techniques, frustrated Emily, but also honed her patience and strategic thinking. She realized that perseverance, not impulsiveness, would be key if she were ever to uncover the truth. Over time, Emily began to build networks. She reached out to friends in forensic programs, professors, and later colleagues who specialized in DNA analysis and cold case investigations. Each conversation planted seeds of knowledge she would need decades later, when technology finally caught up to the circumstances of Michael's disappearance. Her early obsession, once an emotional coping mechanism, evolved into expertise, blending grief with education and determination. Community interest continued to wane. The neighbors who once volunteered in search parties had moved on to other concerns. Fundraisers that had sought to cover search expenses or provide support for the family dwindled in attendance. The local news station briefly covered anniversaries of Michael's disappearance, but the stories were short, almost perfunctory, and lacked any new information. The Harper family felt isolated. Not only had they lost Michael, but the world around them had shifted, leaving them suspended in a bubble of grief, memory, and unanswered questions. Lucas, growing up, experienced the effects of this isolation. Without his father's presence, milestones lacked the guidance and shared joy a parent provides. Birthdays, school achievements, and first experiences were celebrated with a muted sense of absence. Yet, Emily and Rachel worked tirelessly to maintain a sense of continuity. Emily would tell Lucas stories of Michael's kindness, his cleverness with engines, and his unwavering moral compass. Rachel would read letters he had sent to family members, recounting mundane yet intimate moments that kept his memory alive. Through these recollections, Lucas maintained a connection, however fragile, to the father he barely remembered. As the years stretched on, Emily's dedication became all-consuming. She analyzed case studies of similar disappearances, tracked patterns in unresolved crimes, and began documenting potential forensic advancements that could one day apply to Michael's case. She learned of techniques that didn't exist in 2003, methods that could extract DNA from environmental traces, analyze old soil samples, and reconstruct events from minimal evidence. This was no longer a personal obsession. It became a mission, a responsibility she could not ignore. Rachel noticed the shift. Where once Emily had been a sister, now she was a seeker, a crusader armed with knowledge and determination. Rachel worried about the toll this might take on her, but she could also see the spark of hope it carried. A chance, however slim, that Michael's story might one day reach resolution. Together, the family navigated the years, holding on to fragments of hope, memories, and the unspoken promise that they would not forget, that they would continue searching even when the world moved on. And so, a silent vow was made in the Harper household. Emily Harper, fueled by grief, love, and determination, committed herself to finding the truth. She would not allow decades to erase Michael's memory. She would learn, adapt, and fight to ensure that one day the storm that swallowed her brother could not keep him hidden any longer. For you, the viewer, if someone you loved vanished without explanation, how far would you go to uncover the truth? Would you dedicate years, your education, and your life to finding answers? Comment below with your thoughts. Your insight could inspire someone else who is fighting a similar battle. And if you want to follow this journey as Emily turns her determination into action, subscribe to the channel to witness how perseverance and science combine to unearth answers that time cannot erase. The conference hall in Atlanta buzzed with anticipation, a blend of scientists, law enforcement personnel, students, and advocates filling the rows of seats. Emily Harper felt both nervous and exhilarated as she navigated the crowd, clutching her notebook tightly. For over 2 decades, she had watched her family grieve, wondering if any answers would ever emerge. Tonight, she wasn't a grieving sister. Tonight, she was a seeker, a determined student of forensic science who had spent years immersing herself in the minutiae of crime scene investigation and DNA technologies. At the front of the room, a large screen displayed bold letters: Environmental Trace DNA Analysis, Unlocking Cold Case Mysteries. Dr. Victoria Lane, a poised forensic biologist in her late 30s, stepped to the podium. Her confident presence commanded attention, and Emily felt a spark of hope she hadn't dared to feel in years. Environmental DNA, or EDNA, Dr. Lane began, is a tool that allows us to extract genetic material left behind by humans and other organisms on surfaces, soil, and fabrics. Even decades-old evidence that appeared useless can yield usable DNA profiles with this method. Traditional forensic analysis focuses on visible biological evidence: blood, hair, saliva. But EDNA pushes beyond what we can see, providing access to genetic material hidden in the environment. Emily scribbled furiously in her notebook, her heart pounding. This wasn't just theory. Dr. Lane was showing real cases. One involved a murder in rural Ohio. Soil swabs taken from an abandoned car in 1987, stored in evidence lockers and forgotten for 26 years, produced a full DNA profile that led to the identification of the perpetrator. Another example highlighted a decades-old jacket found in a police locker, where microscopic particles contained DNA that cracked a case once thought impossible to solve. The room was silent, rapt with attention. Emily's mind raced. Michael's disappearance had suffered from the same problem as these cases. Evidence had been meticulously collected in 2003, but it had remained untouched in storage, waiting for the right technology. Could those soil swabs, fabric samples from the truck, even fingerprints or residues, finally tell the story that had eluded investigators for more than 20 years? As the session ended, Emily approached Dr. Lane with cautious determination. "Dr. Lane," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "my brother disappeared in 2003. Evidence was preserved, but the case went cold. Could Edna help us extract DNA now, after all this time?" Dr. Lane studied her thoughtfully. "If the evidence has been preserved correctly, sealed, dry, protected from contamination, there's a very real chance. I've seen DNA successfully extracted from samples over 20 years old. It's painstaking, and it requires patience, but it's possible. Your persistence could make the difference between evidence sitting idle and evidence revealing the truth." Emily thanked her, her mind alight with possibilities. On the plane back to Alabama, she drafted emails, made phone calls, and prepared to pitch the idea to the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences. She wasn't just seeking answers for her brother. She was advocating for an entire class of cases where technology had outpaced the capabilities of investigators 2 decades earlier. Her first call went to a case manager in the department. "We appreciate your concern, Miss Harper," the voice said politely, "but we have hundreds of cold cases awaiting review. Without approved funding, there's no guarantee we can prioritize your brother's investigation." Emily took a deep breath, refusing to let discouragement take hold. "I understand the constraints," she replied, "but I believe this case can demonstrate the potential of Edna technology. If we can show that preserved evidence, even decades old, can produce results, it could revolutionize cold case investigations across the state." Over the following weeks, Emily's advocacy intensified. She wrote op-eds for Alabama newspapers, detailing the promise of Edna and highlighting the Harper case. She described how soil from the tires of Michael's truck, fabric swabs from the seats, and even personal items could yield DNA, turning a case once written off as unsolvable into one poised for resolution. Her words struck a chord with the public, generating letters of support and drawing the attention of local journalists. Television crews arrived at the Harper family home, where Rachel and Emily recounted Michael's disappearance. Lucas, now a young man in his 20s, sat quietly in the background, listening to the story of a father he had barely known, but whose absence had shaped his entire life. "We're not asking for special treatment," Emily told a reporter. "We're asking for the science to be applied where it can actually help." Emily also reached out to state legislators, explaining how targeted funding could prioritize cases with preserved evidence ready for modern analysis. She brought with her photographs, lab notes from 2003, and Dr. Lane's published research on Edna. "It's not just about my brother," Emily emphasized during a legislative hearing. "It's about hundreds of families who deserve answers. Science exists to solve these mysteries. It's only a question of whether we give it the chance." Weeks passed. The Department of Forensic Sciences finally agreed to locate the preserved evidence. In a climate-controlled storage facility, investigators retrieved swabs from Michael's truck seats, small soil samples from the tires, and personal items that had accompanied him on that fateful night. Everything had been stored with care, untouched by mishandling, waiting patiently for technology to catch up. Dr. Victoria Lane personally oversaw the preparation of the samples. She instructed Emily on the importance of minimizing contamination. "Every touch, every air particle can introduce foreign DNA. This is why we take meticulous care. If the evidence was properly preserved, we may be able to extract a profile that leads to answers." Emily watched closely as the team began microscopic analysis, extracting particles invisible to the naked eye. She held her breath as they processed each sample, knowing that decades of unanswered questions hinged on this fragile thread of genetic material. For weeks, the process continued. Emily called the lab twice a week, sometimes multiple times a day. "Any updates?" she would ask, trying to keep her composure while her mind raced with hope and fear. Dr. Lane's replies were cautious. "Progress is steady, but even with Edna, DNA recovery isn't guaranteed. Patience is essential." Finally, one rainy morning, reminiscent of the night Michael vanished, Emily's phone rang. "Emily, we have a DNA profile," Dr. Lane said, her tone measured but filled with a quiet triumph. "It's strong, complete, and ready to run against the national databases. This is what we've been hoping for." Emily's knees weakened, and she had to sit down. After more than 20 years, the mystery that had haunted her family was beginning to unravel. The profile, meticulously extracted from soil and fabric, represented a link between the past and the present, a voice of truth reaching across decades. 3 days later, another call came. "Emily," Dr. Lane said softly, "the profile matches an individual who lived in Crestwood County at the time of your brother's disappearance. He's deceased, but we finally have a name. It's someone investigators never considered during the initial search." Emily exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief and sorrow washing over her. The truth was finally revealed, but justice in a courtroom would remain impossible. Still, for the first time in 21 years, the family could confront reality and start the process of closure. The experience taught Emily an invaluable lesson. Cold cases are not lost causes. With preserved evidence, persistent advocacy, and the right application of science, answers can emerge even decades later. Technology evolves, investigative methods improve, and individuals who refuse to give up can alter outcomes long thought impossible. And here's where you come in. Science can uncover truths long after events occur, but it often takes someone willing to champion that cause. If you had a loved one's case sitting cold for decades, how far would you go to push for new technology and answers? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if stories like this captivate you, make sure to subscribe. This channel follows Emily's journey and others like it, where perseverance and science bring long overdue justice. The call came on a quiet Wednesday morning, the kind of morning that carried no warning. Emily Harper was sitting at her kitchen table in Birmingham, a mug of coffee growing cold beside her laptop. When her phone vibrated against the wood, she recognized the number immediately, an Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences extension she had memorized after years of unanswered voicemails. She didn't answer right away. For a moment, she just stared at the screen, her heartbeat loud in her ears. This was it, she thought. Or it was nothing. There had been false alarms before, partial profiles, inconclusive markers, technical limitations that ended with polite apologies. She had learned not to hope too quickly. Finally, she answered. Detective Adrian Cortez's voice was calm, professional, but there was something beneath it. An edge he hadn't had before. He asked her if she was sitting down. Emily almost laughed at the cliché, but she complied, gripping the edge of the table with one hand. They had a match, not a partial, not a possibility. A full DNA profile, recovered from environmental samples collected from Michael Harper's truck in 2003, soil embedded in the floor mats, microscopic traces preserved on fabric fibers beneath the driver's seat. The profile had been run through national databases, cross-referenced with criminal records that hadn't even existed when Michael disappeared. The name came back clean and unmistakable. David Kellner. Emily closed her eyes as the name settled into her chest. She had never heard it before, yet it carried weight immediately, as if her body understood before her mind could catch up. Cortez explained that Kellner had a history: armed robbery, assault, transient work across Alabama and neighboring states. He'd been arrested multiple times in the early 2000s, then again in 2007, served time, and died in 2019 from a heart condition while living in northern Georgia. "He's deceased," Cortez said carefully, as if the word itself might fracture her. Emily nodded, though he couldn't see her. Deceased. The word landed strangely. There was relief in knowing the person responsible could never hurt anyone again, but also a sharp, unexpected grief. There would be no confrontation, no trial, no courtroom moment where Michael's name would be spoken aloud in judgment. Justice, it seemed, would come differently. Within hours, Cortez and Dr. Victoria Lane were in a secure conference room at the state lab, re-verifying results. Every protocol was followed. Independent analysts confirmed the profile. Chain of custody logs were reviewed line by line. Nothing was rushed. They knew what this meant. For the case, for the family, for every cold case that might follow. Emily arrived later that afternoon, escorted past locked doors and humming machines. She watched from behind a glass partition as technicians worked, their movements precise, almost reverent. This was science at its most human, she thought. Not cold or detached, but careful because the stakes were lives, even decades later. Dr. Lane met her afterward, placing a hand gently on Emily's shoulder. "This is solid," she said, "as solid as it gets." The next step was building the story backward. Detective Cortez pulled old files from archives that smelled faintly of dust and paper. Reports from 2003 were re-examined with fresh eyes. A name that had once meant nothing now became a focal point. Kellner's movements were mapped as best they could be. Arrest records, employment stubs, witness statements that had never seemed relevant before. And then there was Patricia Kellner. She lived in a small, aging house outside Dothan, Alabama, the kind with peeling paint and a porch that sagged slightly under the weight of time. She hadn't used her husband's last name in years, but legally it remained. When Detective Cortez knocked on her door, she knew why he was there before he said a word. She had been waiting for this day without realizing it. Patricia was in her early 60s now, her hair streaked with gray, her hands trembling as she poured coffee into chipped mugs. She apologized repeatedly, for the mess, for her nerves, for things that didn't need apologies. Cortez reassured her gently, explaining that her husband had been identified in connection with a decades-old disappearance. At first, she said nothing. Then she looked out the window, toward the yard where rain had begun to fall lightly, and something in her expression shifted. The storm outside wasn't violent, but it was enough. "He came home late that night," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "February, cold, soaked, angry." Her words came slowly at first, then faster, as if once the dam broke, they couldn't be contained. David had been frantic, pacing, muttering about a man who wouldn't stop talking, about a truck, about the rain. He'd scrubbed his hands raw at the sink, snapping at her when she asked questions. She remembered the smell, mud and gasoline and something metallic she hadn't recognized at the time. "I was scared," Patricia admitted. "I knew better than to push. When David got like that, you stayed quiet." She had asked where he'd been. He told her to forget it, told her it was nothing, told her to mind her business. And she did. For years, she carried that night like a secret bruise, tender but hidden. When she later heard about a missing mechanic on the news, something twisted in her stomach, but fear kept her silent. By the time David was arrested again, by the time she left him, by the time he died, the case had faded into obscurity. Until now. "I'm sorry," she said, tears streaking her face. "I should have said something. I was just trying to survive." Cortez listened without interruption. He didn't judge. He knew fear could be as powerful as guilt. Her testimony, combined with the DNA, allowed investigators to reconstruct the night with grim clarity. Michael Harper had stopped on Highway 58 during the storm, not out of recklessness but instinct. Helping was who he was. Somewhere along that stretch of road he encountered David Kellner, stranded, desperate, and dangerous. What began as an offer of assistance escalated into violence. The storm masked everything, the sounds, the struggle, the evidence. Kellner left Michael in the woods, close enough to the road that his truck would be found, far enough that no one would hear him. He fled, believing the storm would do the rest. And it had. When Detective Cortez delivered the news to the Harper family, he did so in person. Rachel Harper sat on the couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Lucas, now a young adult, leaned against the doorway, his face unreadable. Samuel Harper stood by the window, staring out as if bracing himself. Emily spoke first. "Who was he?" Cortez told them. Rachel closed her eyes. There was no scream, no collapse, just a slow exhale, as if she had been holding her breath for 20 years and hadn't realized it. Relief and grief tangled together in her chest. "He's gone," Lucas said quietly. "Yes," Cortez replied. "He can't be prosecuted." Samuel finally turned around. "But my son didn't disappear," he said. "He was taken." That distinction mattered. In the days that followed, emotions surfaced in waves. Rachel grieved anew, this time for the certainty she had lacked. Lucas wrestled with anger, not just at Kellner but at time itself, at a childhood shaped by absence. Emily felt vindicated, but also hollow. She had won a battle she never wanted to fight. And yet there was still one thing left. Michael hadn't been found. Dr. Alan Foster arrived in Crestwood County under gray skies, his presence quiet but commanding. He had spent his career recovering the lost, giving names back to bones, stories back to families. He walked the woods near Highway 58 with measured steps, studying terrain, soil composition, patterns of erosion. "This storm moved things," he explained to Emily, "but it didn't erase everything. Nature buries, but it also preserves." Search teams assembled once more, this time guided by science instead of hope alone. Ground-penetrating radar swept the forest floor. Dogs, trained to detect human remains, worked methodically through underbrush. For the first time in over 2 decades, the search had direction. As Emily stood at the edge of the woods, watching the methodical work unfold, she thought of the night Michael disappeared. How the storm had hidden the truth. How science had finally learned how to listen to what the earth remembered. And she wondered something else, something she knew others watching this story might wonder too. If the person responsible was already gone, what did justice look like? Was it punishment? Or was it truth? Would knowing be enough? That question lingered, heavy and unresolved. And if you've ever thought about what you would do in that situation, if answers came without accountability, share your thoughts below. And if stories like this, where persistence and science bring truth back from silence, matter to you, make sure you're subscribed. Because there are more families still waiting, and their stories are far from over. The search moved deeper into the woods, and for the first time since that stormy night in 2003, Michael Harper was no longer lost. The woods off Highway 58 had changed in 22 years, but they had not forgotten. Trees had grown thicker, their roots knitting together beneath the soil like interlocked fingers. Fallen branches layered the forest floor, hiding depressions and scars left by storms long past. What once had been open ground was now dense with undergrowth, but to Dr. Alan Foster the land still spoke. It always did. You just had to know how to listen. The first anomaly appeared on the second day of the renewed search. Ground-penetrating radar registered an irregular density several yards off the roadway, closer than anyone had expected. The signal was faint but distinct, enough to make Dr. Foster raise a hand and halt the search team. He knelt, brushing aside damp leaves, studying the subtle slope of the terrain. Time and weather had smoothed it almost flat, but something about the soil felt different here. "This is it," he said quietly. Emily Harper stood several steps back, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She had imagined this moment countless times, feared it, hoped for it, prepared for it, but nothing could fully brace her for the reality of it. Rachel stood beside her, holding Samuel's hand, while Lucas lingered just behind them, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on the spot where the earth would soon be opened. No one spoke as the forensic team began their work. The excavation was slow and deliberate, each movement careful, respectful. Soil was removed layer by layer, documented, sifted. Within the first hour, Dr. Foster uncovered the edge of fabric. Faded, brittle, but unmistakably human-made. He paused, took a breath, and nodded to his team. They all knew what it meant. As more soil was cleared away, the outline of remains emerged, partially skeletonized, positioned in a way that told its own silent story. Michael Harper had been placed there hastily, concealed by storm debris and darkness rather than intention. Nature had done the rest, folding him into the land, preserving him in fragments while time marched on above him. Rachel let out a sound she didn't recognize as her own. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't a sob. It was something raw, a release of 22 years of not knowing. Emily felt her knees weaken, but she stayed upright, grounding herself in the moment. This wasn't just about grief. This was about bringing her brother home. Dr. Foster oversaw the recovery with quiet reverence. Every bone, every fragment of clothing was cataloged and protected. Personal effects were found nearby, corroded metal, remnants of fabric consistent with what Michael had been wearing the night he disappeared. The location matched the reconstructed timeline precisely. There was no doubt. Michael Harper had been here all along. The forensic examination that followed took weeks. Dr. Foster worked meticulously, piecing together the final moments of Michael's life with the care of someone who understood the weight of what he was doing. The cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma, consistent with a violent assault. The injuries told a story of sudden, overwhelming force, not prolonged suffering, but a swift, brutal end. For Rachel, that knowledge was painful, but it also brought a strange sense of peace. Michael hadn't wandered off. He hadn't abandoned them. He hadn't chosen to disappear. He had done what he always did, stopped to help, and someone had taken advantage of that kindness. When the remains were formally identified and released, Rachel held the calligraphy-embossed paperwork in her hands for a long time before she could bring herself to sign. It felt surreal, authorizing something she had waited more than half her life to do: plan a funeral. The service was held at Crestwood Baptist Church on a clear Saturday morning, sunlight pouring through the stained glass windows like a blessing long delayed. The pews filled quickly. Then they filled some more. People came from neighboring towns, former customers from Harper Auto, volunteers who had searched in 2003, law enforcement officers who had never stopped wondering. Michael Harper had been gone for 22 years. He had not been forgotten. Rachel stood at the pulpit, her hands steady despite the tremor in her voice. She spoke not of the violence, not of the storm, but of the man Michael had been. The way he fixed things no one else could. The way he never charged elderly neighbors full price. The way he carried Lucas on his shoulders and danced with Emily in the kitchen just to make her laugh. He didn't just repair cars, Rachel said. He repaired people's faith in each other. Lucas listened from the front row, hearing stories he had only known in fragments. For the first time, his father was no longer just an absence or a mystery. He was a person, a man, a presence that had shaped his life even in silence. Emily was asked to stand, the congregation rising with her. She hadn't sought recognition, but it came anyway, quiet applause that swelled into something stronger. Not for heroism, but for refusal, for not letting time win. After the service, Michael was laid to rest in Crestwood Cemetery under open sky. Samuel Harper stood silently as the casket was lowered, his hand resting over his heart. He had lost a son, but he had regained certainty. And that mattered. Life did not return to normal afterward. It moved forward, different, heavier, but grounded. The Harper family home felt less haunted now. Rachel finally packed away Michael's clothes, not because she was erasing him, but because she no longer needed the physical reminders to keep him close. Lucas framed one photograph from the service and placed it on his desk, a quiet acknowledgement of a connection finally understood. Emily, meanwhile, turned grief into momentum. She worked with Crestwood Technical High School to donate Michael's tools, every wrench, socket, and diagnostic device he had owned. The school created the Harper Workshop, a dedicated space where students could learn automotive repair using the same tools Michael had once held. On the wall, a plaque read, "In memory of Michael Harper, who believed that helping others was never optional." Emily stood at the dedication ceremony, watching teenagers crowd around the workbenches, their hands eager, curious. This, she thought, was legacy. Not just memory, but impact. Her advocacy didn't stop there. Emily collaborated with Dr. Victoria Lane and Detective Adrian Cortez to push for expanded funding for environmental trace DNA analysis across Alabama. She testified before legislative committees, spoke at forensic conferences, and met with families still waiting for answers. Because of preserved evidence, because of persistence, because science had caught up. Other cases reopened. Some were solved, some weren't. Yet. But hope returned to rooms where it had long been absent. And that mattered too. Michael Harper's story became more than a tragedy. It became proof. Proof that storms can erase evidence but not truth. Proof that time can delay justice but not destroy it. Proof that love, when paired with determination, can reach across decades. And that leaves one final question for you. What would you do to preserve a loved one's memory, or to ensure justice when the world moves on too quickly? Would you fight? Would you wait? Would you refuse to let silence win? Share your thoughts below, or tell us a story from your own life, because these conversations matter. Thank you for joining us in uncovering stories hidden in the shadows. Every victim deserves to be remembered. Every truth deserves to be told. To follow more cold cases, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share these stories. Your support helps keep their voices alive.